The Ancestral Trail, Book 5, Boltor, Bird of Thunder. Published by Marshall Cavendish, 1993. Based on a story by Frank Graves. Each of the three felt a sickening lurch as they plummeted into the abyss. Wind roared in their ears as they sped faster and faster towards the ground. One moment Richard saw the misty depths for which they were heading. Next he saw outlined against a dark sky the ridge from which they had fallen, and behind it he saw a bird-like shape speeding towards them. Then there was a thump. His chest felt as if it were gripped by iron bands. He looked down and saw huge, yellowed, horny fingers around his ribs. To his right he could see Orcan and Melek slumped limply in a giant fist. The three companions were still in the air, but they had been saved from their plummeting spiral. Then Richard felt a tickling on his skin. He looked up and saw feathers ruffling above him. His vision doubled, and he blacked out. When he came to, Richard was on solid ground, in a flat, hard desert, dotted with spiky cactus plants. Nearby, Melek and Orcan rubbed their eyes groggily, and above Richard towered a giant bird. "Don't be afraid," the bird said. "I know who you are. My name is Organga, and I am a friend. Like your companions, I escaped from the final battle, and I have been searching for survivors." He paused, then added sadly, "There are not many of us."
"There are more than you think," Orcan broke in. "We've just come from the City of Stone. Jarut is free."
"I know. I have just left him," Organga said, "but he and his troops were in trouble and fighting for their lives." "What?" Richard was horrified. "It all seemed fine when we left." "Things were far from fine when I came along," Organga said, shaking his head. Then he told them of what had happened. Giant earwig soldiers armed with sharp black pincers had marched on the city. Jarut and his troops had fought them as they poured through the gates. By the time Organga had arrived, there were dozens of corpses around Jarut's feet. Yet more soldiers came to take their place. "But why didn't you stay and help?" Richard asked, furious at Organga. "I did, for a bit," Organga replied, "but Jarut urged me to leave. He told me to catch up with you three, because your mission was more important than his. Lucky I took his advice." Yes, thank you," Richard said, realising that he had yet to thank Organga for saving his life. Orcan and Melek also mumbled their gratitude. Organga nodded and said, "It's best to be on our way now. I'll fly on ahead to make sure it's safe." Organga took to the air, and the three moved off in the same direction on the ground. As they walked along, Melek read aloud from the Book of Prophecies. "A flight through air to withered land, beware the storm the desert spanned. A bone-filled grave awaits the brave, but hidden bounties save. Within dark earth a lonely night, from skyborn spite at dreadful cost, a hard-won treasure now is lost." Richard shuddered when the dwarf reached the last line. "A hard-won treasure lost," Richard repeated under his breath. Had he got the pod back just to lose it again so soon? He would have to be on his guard. On the horizon the clouds were dark, and flashes of dry lightning tore up the sky. Once a fireball shot from the sky and came bouncing across the ground towards them. When it passed near them, Richard felt his hair rise with the electric charge it carried. Then it careened away, leaving singed stones and a smell of burnt sand in its wake. They pressed on across the dry wastes. Cocking his head to one side, Orcan asked suddenly, "What's that?" Then Richard and Melek heard it too. A harsh roaring noise over a distant rumble and thud. They spun round to face a low bank of red cloud rolling above the horizon. At centre stage was the ominous black funnel of a tornado. It was spitting up sand at its base and drawing huge rocks into its spiralling height. They watched in horror as it sped towards them, a narrow, twisting rope that snaked from side to side like a giant whiplash joining earth and sky.
"We've got to get underground," Orcan said urgently. "It's our only hope."
But where? There's nowhere to go, Melek wailed in despair. Over there, Richard pointed. There's a small gully behind that line of scrub. It will have to do. They ran desperately. Behind them the roaring grew in strength, and a fierce wind buffeted their backs. The three threw themselves into the hollow and curled up in tight balls on the ground. A blast of hot air and stinging sand tore angrily at the trio. The noise was deafening. Then the tornado was over the bank and into the gully. Melek and Orcan disappeared from sight, as if snatched by a giant hand. For a split second, Richard found himself staring up into the heart of the tornado, a dark, dreadful funnel that led to the heavens. Its sides were dotted with whirling lumps of stone and vegetation. And then he too was spinning helplessly up and up towards the evil ochre sky. Meanwhile, unaware of the devastation behind him, Organga had flown far ahead to the mountains that bordered the desert. Suddenly he spotted movement below, and, wheeling silently on his gigantic wings, he spiralled down to investigate. Organga found a group of battered birds huddled together on a ledge. He recognised them immediately as the outriders who had flown in his squadron during the final battle. The unit had been savaged. The birds were all wounded, and one, Organga reckoned, would not live more than a few more days. The birds poured out their tales of woe to Organga. They told of injury and of flight, and of the difficulty of hiding in a land now filled with enemy eyes. One tale, however, drew Organga's attention. A badly scarred bird had heard that a life force pod was hidden in the mountain lair of Enlil, a vicious bat-like creature in the Evil One's power. Enlil kept an army of slaves, and the bird had learned about the pod from an escaped prisoner. Before an execution, Enlil had taunted his victims with the pod and bragged that it would never be recovered. Organga then told his old comrades about Richard and his quest. "I must go back and tell him where the pod is." "Good luck to you all," Organga said, reluctant to leave them so helpless. He took to the air and flew fast to tell Richard his news. But his heart sank when he saw the tornado's track twisting across the desert. Rising high into the sky to increase his field of vision, Organga began to quarter the land in a methodical search. As Organga sped through the skies, the trio were finding their bearings. Their journey with the tornado had taken them far into the desert before the storm had finally stopped, stranding them in a remote spot. The wind spout must have faded gradually, Richard thought, letting them down gently. Had it collapsed in mid-flow, with its burden still high in the air, they would have been splattered across the toasted landscape. Richard now found himself in a shallow depression, filled with skeletons. The remains, he guessed, of a terrible battle. Nearby he saw Melek and Orcan heave themselves upwards awkwardly from a crackling mass of bones. As Richard walked towards the others, the heat beat at him in waves. He was amazed at how much he had been able to endure so far, but unless they found water soon, he thought they would either die of thirst or be roasted alive.
"We're lucky," Orcan said when Richard told him of his fears. "Look over there."
Through the heat shimmer, Richard saw a stand of spiky cactuses. Using his sword to split them open, Orcan revealed white, watery pulp behind the prickles. As the three sucked out the liquid, they heard a pulse in the air. It was Organga, hurtling towards them. He came in fast, sending up clouds of sand as he landed. "At last," Organga said with relief. "I've been searching everywhere for you." He listened as they told him about the tornado, marvelling at how well the three had come through their ordeal. And then he told them the good news. "I have to warn you," Organga finished. "Enlil is not alone. He has a wife, Erna. She is just as vicious as Enlil and very greedy. They live in a dying volcano whose fires are constantly replenished by teams of slaves. They never let their possessions out of their sight. The pod will be watched night and day. You can count on that."
"It doesn't matter," Richard shrugged. "We have to recover the pods, wherever they are. If Enlil's got one, then we have to get it back. That's all there is to it."
Then I'd better take you there, Organga said, as he seized them in his massive talons, and he took off. They soared high into the air, rising in slow circles on the hot desert winds. Then Organga judged the altitude to be correct. He banked and shot towards the mountainous horizon. The hazy peaks of the Wolf-Kill Mountains grew gradually nearer and nearer. Soon they were gliding softly and with skilful elegance between the heavily wooded slopes. "We'll stop at the next peak," Organga said, skimming smoothly over a saddle in the hills. "We could all do with a rest." As he rose above the valley, there came a raucous screeching, and the sky filled with menacing, hook-beaked shapes. "Sky pirates!" Organga exclaimed, swerving quickly one way, then the other. "They are vultures who don't even wait until their prey is dead before they go in and start to feed. Don't worry, we'll soon lose them." Yet, despite his strength, Organga was unable to evade his attackers for long. The weight of Richard, Orcan and Melek slowed him down too much. "I'll have to land," Organga said, having dodged and curved in vain through the hills. "They're still on our tail. Brace yourselves." Organga came in fast and shallow over a scree-laden slope, releasing the trio just before touchdown. As they sprawled harmlessly across the rocks, the huge bird landed just beyond, in an untidy skid that sent a clatter of rubble rattling down the hill. The vultures, caught off guard, peeled upwards in neat formation to regroup. They massed in preparation for their next strike. Then a much larger bird rose high above the ground. As it spread its great shadowy wings, a bolt of lightning shot out from its sharply curved talons. The bolt streaked towards the three companions, but missed and singed a nearby outcrop. "This is worse than I thought," Organga said, recognizing the vulture's leader. "That is Boltor, the bird of thunder. His powerful thunderbolts can kill from a great distance. You must get under cover fast. You're not safe here out in the open. Leave me to fight him in the air. I know his tricks, and I've got a few of my own. Now go and hide, quickly." As Organga flew into battle, Richard clutched Golan's amulet. Immediately he sensed the Guardian's voice, telling him to look across to a red bush. A low tree covered in fiery berries was hugging the ground to his right. "This way!" Richard shouted, plunging towards the tree. Orcan and Melek followed just in time to see Richard disappear through a small crevice that lay hidden beneath the tree's roots. They wormed in after him and found themselves in a den. It must have been inhabited at one time, because a well-sooted fireplace stood in the middle of the floor, surrounded by a sprinkling of tiny bones, leftovers of many an ancient meal. Whoever had lived here was long gone, but the den provided a safe refuge for the three companions. There was no way their pursuers could follow them in here. Huddled in their hideaway, they watched Organga soar majestically against the dark, rusty sky. He circled slowly above Boltor, then swooped down, faster than an arrow. Boltor flipped backwards, and jagged bolts of pure energy shot out from his talons. A loud explosion rent the air, and lightning flashes lit up the sky. Then Organga tore down at the bird of thunder. 2 steel-blue feathers whizzed at Boltor. A second later, Organga's powerful talons were digging deep into the enemy's chest. The bird of thunder gave an ear-splitting screech, and the 2 birds plummeted out of sight. The 3 waited for a while. It was Orcan who broke the silence.
"Let's get some sleep," he said. "There's nothing we can do. One of us can stand guard to keep an eye out for Organga. We'll take it in shifts. I'll start."
Richard and Melek needed no prompting. They were exhausted from their travels. They moved back into the den, and soon the air was filled with the sound of deep breathing. Orcan sat cross-legged by the narrow opening. He secretly doubted whether they would ever see Organga again. Nobody could survive that sort of odds. They had been stacked way against the great bird. Then a small, sing-song voice broke into Orcan's thoughts.
"Before the sun, behind the moon, the days like thunder run. By 26 the time is up, all evil will be done."
It was Melek. He was talking in his sleep. Orcan turned and stared at his wizened companion. The words meant nothing to him, so he turned back to his vigil. Time passed slowly, and he wondered how long he should wait before waking one of the others to take his place. He stretched out and made himself comfortable. Waking with a start, Orcan was horrified to find that he had nodded off. Rising to his feet, he peered cautiously out of the den. There was no sign of any birds. He ducked back inside and went to wake Richard and Melek. While they rubbed the sleep from their eyes, Orcan outlined the situation. He also repeated Melek's midnight ramblings in the hope that one or the other would be able to cast some light on their meaning. Richard shook his head. Well, it sounds like one of the prophecies. We'll just have to wait and see what it means, though. The important thing now is the quest. If Organga has not returned, there's no point in waiting here. For all we know, he could be dead. I think we should move on. The trio stepped out onto the hillside. Around them lay the signs of a fierce battle. Feathers littered the ground. The rocks were splattered with dried blood. On the topmost crags, patches of fresh stone showed where Boltor's thunder had exploded away from its target. Even the sky was a baleful shade of red. Yet there was no sign of any bodies. Richard was appalled at the ferocity of the battle. "Let's hope Organga is safe," he said. Then he set off along the slope, with Melek and Orcan scrambling in his wake over the loose pebbles. Richard decided it would be safest if they roped up, using the length that Melek still carried with him from Sumar's river. The further they went, the steeper the slope became. Now the rope was invaluable, as they helped each other down the most difficult stretches. They were taking the most difficult downhill direct route they could find, but even so the wooded valley bottom seemed as far away as ever. The three were inching along a narrow ledge towards what looked like an easier way down, when Melek lost his footing. He scrambled desperately for a handhold, but in vain, and he fell out into space. Richard just had time to shout a warning for Orcan to hang on tight. Once again the rope showed its true worth, and bit by bit Richard and Orcan hauled Melek back to safety. Then, just as his fingertips grasped the ledge, there was a snap from the Book of Prophecies, and it tumbled away down the mountain. It spun through the air, bouncing off the hillside in high, arching leaps. And then it was gone from sight. Finally, a distant thud signalled that the book had come to rest. But where it might have landed was anybody's guess.